Hello class and welcome to video 15, Habit 5, Part 2. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. So we're going to start off by viewing a video called Are You Listening? I'd like to point out that this video covers some major points and it provides scenarios for those points for listening skills. The first one is to stop talking and take the time to listen. Second, listen for understanding. Third, listen with your heart, not just your mind or your ears. Fourth, stop doing other things. It's hard to do two things at once. You need to pay all your attention to listening. Next, pay attention to nonverbal messages as well as what people say. Quit defending your position so you can understand the other person. That's the seek first to understand. Use active listening. Repeat back what you heard them say in your own words. And don't be lazy. Avoid preoccupation. And lastly, avoid prejudice and biases. Now, I'd like to point out two things. First, this is a video that was put out by my church, but we're not going to cover anything doctrinal in it. And secondly, it's a little dated as far as the time frame is concerned, but the principles are still timeless. So here we go.
There are moments when the whole world listens, for much is at stake.
At the foot of the ladder, the limb footbeds are only depressed in the surface about 1 or 2 inches, and they'll step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Hello there. I was just listening to some of the sounds of spring. There are a lot of sounds that compete for our attention these days. Usually, the bigger ones get it. But sometimes, equal or even more important sounds, the ones we have to try harder to hear, are missed. I'm a listener, and so are you, or you should be. I listen a lot, and I talk a lot. And I'm really concerned about communication. All of us make some pretty serious mistakes in this area. There are a few things I've learned that perhaps I could share with you. They're not original with me, but they've been helpful to me. So are you listening and watching? This house belongs to some friends of mine, Roger and Joan Manning. Right now, they're out back having a barbecue.
Thank you.
Well, anyway, I was telling you, you know the
Gotcha.
you know the teacher when he came?
Yeah.
Well, we thought we were going to get in a whole bunch of...
Roger, Joan, and their children make some of the same mistakes that you and I make. And I think that if we watch carefully, we can learn some things. Let's just hurry it on a bit. What's going on here, Rick?
Well, hi, Dad. Why aren't you asleep?
Well, that's what I would like to know. What in the world are you doing?
Just listening to some music. I can't sleep.
So you don't want anybody else in the house to sleep either, is that it? Will you turn that thing off?
Sorry, I didn't think you could hear it up there.
Now, look, it's 3:30 in the morning.
Sorry, I just can't sleep.
Now, listen to me. You've got to go to school in the morning. Now, what kind of grades do you expect to get if you can't even stay awake in class?
I know.
And your health. You want to have a breakdown before you're 20 just because you stay up all night listening to that drivel?
Sorry.
Now, you get to bed, you hear?
Now, if this father had been listening, not just to crickets and the dripping tap, if he'd stopped talking long enough to listen, he might have learned some important things. Watch.
What's going on here, Rick?
I just can't sleep.
Can't sleep. What's the trouble?
It's nothing.
Something bothering you?
Well, after school, some guys were talking about girls and stuff. Dad, you don't want to listen to this.
Of course I do, son.
Well, we've always been taught in church that, but some of the guys seem
With a
to
little
think
listening, you can learn a lot. It takes time, but in the long run, it saves time. And saves souls, too. For human values are at stake, and people very close to you.
Thanks, Dad. Sorry I ruined your sleep.
That's all right. I'll see you later.
Would you hit the light?
Unfortunately, most of us are pretty bad listeners, in spite of the fact that listening is one of our major occupations. In fact, of all the time we spend with our family, at work, in church, in all areas, the average person spends 70% of his waking hours in communication, 9% in writing, 16% in reading, 30% in talking, and 45% in listening.
Oranges, eggs, and 2 quarts of milk, okay?
Eggs and milk, right. Bye, sweetheart. Be a good girl.
Bye.
And oranges.
Oranges, eggs, and milk, right.
Bye-bye.
And listening, in which we spend most of our time, is the aspect of communication at which we're least effective, and the one at which we should be most effective. Because without listening, there is no two-way communication.
Hey, come on, why aren't those shoes on?
I can't do it. You do it.
Of course you can do it. I've watched you do it hundreds of times. Now get those shoes on.
You do it. I want you to.
I'm cleaning the kitchen today. And then there's the ironing and the vacuuming and my Sunday school lesson. I have 10,000 things to do today, and one of them is not putting shoes on a big girl who can do it very well for herself. Now get a move on.
This mother was listening all right, but with her ears, not with her heart. If she'd been listening for understanding as well as for information, not just to the words, but to what's behind the words, she would have learned what her child was really saying.
Of course you can do it. Now get those shoes on.
You do it. I want you to. All you ever do is work. I want you to pay attention to me. I'm important too.
10 minutes, my love. And I've got to get back to work. You get your shoes on. I'll get the scissors and glue.
Oh boy. I'd like to make a book today, okay?
Okay.
Know what I'd like to draw on it?
Now what?
Ella.
Oh, fine. Then, I'll cut you out a little book. And you can put elephants in it, all right?
Listening, real listening, is a dimension of love. It confirms our concern and says, I care about you.
Come in. Hi, Raj.
Oh, hi, Steve.
Well, I did it. And that problem with the invoices, I stayed up half the night figuring and refiguring, but finally I got to the bottom of it.
Yeah?
It's basically a matter of incorrect filing. So I worked out this brilliant new plan. No chance for a fella.
Sounds great.
Yeah, well, I was up till 2 o'clock in the morning. I never thought so hard in my life, but I did it. It works like this, Raj. Raj, Excuse me, Steve. Harry.
Huh. If that's all he cares, why should I knock myself out trying to be creative for his stinking department?
The shipment we were talking about?
As you've guessed, there was more being said here than what was spoken. Roger's employee was asking for a little recognition, a little praise. But Roger wasn't really listening. He was talking, however. By his facial expression, his posture, his vocal tone, he was saying, "Ho-hum, big deal." Now, if this wasn't what he wanted to say, he'd better try it again. And this time, he'd better watch his nonverbal language.
That problem with the invoices? I was up half the night figuring and refiguring, but finally I got to the bottom of it.
Yeah?
It's basically a matter of incorrect filing. So I developed this brilliant new plan. No chance for a foul-up.
Hey, well, that sounds great.
Yeah, well, I stayed up till about 2 o'clock.
How late?
I've never thought so hard in my life.
An important relationship strengthened instead of damaged, just through a little appreciative listening. And perhaps some important benefits to the business, too.
We got nowhere with it.
Is that
Absolutely nowhere. And you cracked it just like this?
But it isn't always the employer who fails to listen. Frequently, the employee is guilty of the same fault.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Make sure these payments to Wallen and Company get out in the afternoon's mail.
Okay.
If he doesn't get his money within 30 days, there's a great big fat finance charge.
Yeah,
I learned my lesson from him last summer. He knows every trick in the book.
I'll bet.
So don't give him a chance, huh?
Right. Tim?
Yes, Pete.
Now, these casting totals come to almost $39,000, so I think we'll be all right.
Wow. Steve?
Yeah.
What's this late payment charge from the Wallen Company?
This life isn't long enough for each person to make all the mistakes himself. And the only way to learn from the experience of others is to listen. Really listen. Whether at work or at church or at home, listening is a vital component of leadership. Without it, we can't do our work effectively, or can we help others with theirs. Now, one place where listening is absolutely vital and most often neglected is in our personal relationships, in our families, in our marriages. Take a look.
A second car? I can't believe it. We can't afford a
Sure
second
we
car.
can, Annie. Sure, the payment's only $50 a month. Come
Where's
on,
the money
get
going
in.
to come from, I'd like to know. $50 a month. Out of my food money, maybe?
Don't worry about it, Joan. We can manage all right. I've worked out a very strict budget.
Why didn't you ask me about it?
Oh, Joan.
I'm never consulted about anything around here.
It's your birthday present. I thought it'd be a surprise.
It's a surprise, all right.
Oh, Joan, I only did it for you. I thought you'd be pleased. Look, it's got an automatic transmission on the floor.
Pleased. Roger, not if it means getting deeper and deeper into debt, which we're too far into now.
Look, starts right up the first time. Even when it's cold. No more taking the bus when you go downtown.
We hear all the time at church and at conference to get out of debt. Get out of debt and stay out.
Joan, I just did it for you.
You didn't do it for me. You did it for yourself. If you'd have done it for me, you wouldn't have done it.
Well, thanks a lot. That's the kind of gratitude I get.
Never mind. I don't want to discuss it.
Well, that's fine with me.
Too bad. Now, if Roger and Joan had cared less about defending their own point of view and had been more concerned about learning and listening to the point of view of the other person, this situation might have brought them closer instead of damaging their relationship. If each could really listen closely enough and sympathetically enough to be able to restate the other's position, something like this might happen.
But we just don't seem to think alike on this. Do you understand what I'm feeling?
I think so. You feel that it would be real nice to have a second car. Okay? But you also feel that it would be much nicer to get out of debt. From your point of view, security.
There's a lot more in the balance here than the issue of a second car. The quality of any vital relationship rests on the ability to listen, to really communicate. This is a principle which has eternal implications in every phase of our mortal and spiritual existence. Let's take learning, for example. It's easy to blame the teacher for our lack of interest, but do we really put forth an effort to understand?
Sure wish I didn't have that report in sociology next period. Wish my turn was tomorrow. Let's see. I'm going to talk about our city's crime rate compared to the rate 10 years ago. Yeah, that's not a very interesting opening. 10 years ago, your chance of being murdered in this city... Yeah, that's a lot better.
I talked with Commissioner Rollins.
Commissioner Rollins? I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him. Not after last election. What a phony. Nuts. The whole school's catching cold. It'd be just my luck to get it right in time for the game this weekend. Which reminds me, I've got to find out about the car for Friday.
Another area that's becoming very popular is the field of social services.
That's what I've been planning on going into. Hey, did you hear what he said about the social services?
Later.
Rick missed something just now. Something he needed to know. But he let a little preoccupation, a little prejudice, a little laziness get in his way. But school isn't the only place where this happens. What about our communication at church? Real listening is not a passive exercise. It's a concentrated effort to receive the intended communication from another. Ours is a speaking church, a telling church, but it must also be a listening church. Is it?
I know that we're here on this earth for, well, many important reasons. We was placed here...
We was? Good grief. Makes me cringe to hear language like that. Guess you can't have anything too important to say.
And the more we can learn to love in the way that the Lord loved, the closer we are in doing what we need to do. When he said that we should love our
My goodness. That Nielsen child won't let us sit through one meeting in peace. They just don't discipline their children at all. That's the trouble.
The trick is that we can love those who have in some way injured us. That's the general idea.
What's that? What idea?
I don't know.
They missed something at that meeting. They let a little prejudice get in the way of communication. It is...
Okay, so that's the end of the video. That's where I'm stopping it. And I hope you listened to it, and I want to know if you were listening. So I want you to grab a piece of paper, and I'm going to ask you some questions. This isn't graded, just to see how well you listen. And I'm going to ask you questions regarding the video we just seen. If you have to, you can pause the video to get a piece of paper and then come right back. So here we go. Question number 1. What time was it when Roger heard the music his son was playing? Just write down number 1, your answer. Number 2. What was Roger's wife's name? I counted, I think they said it 7 times. Number 3. What % of our time do we spend reading each day? Number 4. What was Roger supposed to bring home from the store? Number 5. What was the name of the employee who had the good idea? Six. What was the good idea the employee had? Just a couple of words to summarize what it was about. 7. What was the company, or the name of the company, who made the late charges? 8. What was the amount of the casting totals as computed by the employee? 9. What were the monthly payments on the new car? And 10. Who was the commissioner whom you could not trust? What was his name? Now I suspect that you didn't get very many of these correct, but let's go through and see. First, what time was it when Roger heard the music his son was playing? The answer is 3:30 a.m. Number 2, what was Roger's wife's name? I think I said they said it about 7 times. Her name was Joan. 3, what percent of our time do we spend reading each day? Answer 16%. Now this is an interesting one. About half the people get this one correct, even though this is not a video about reading but rather listening. Still, we seem to get numbers correct, like 3:30 a.m. and 16%. 4, what was Roger supposed to bring home from the store? The answer, oranges, eggs, and milk. I bet most of you got that one correct because he forgot oranges at first and the wife had to repeat it. We tend to remember things that are repeated. 5, what was the name of the employee who had the good idea? Whose name was mentioned 4 times. It was Steve. 6, what was the good idea the employee had? It was something about fixing incorrect filing of invoices or filing of invoices. 7, what was the company who made the late charges? It was the Wallen Company. Don't care about your spelling, but the Wallen Company. Number 8, what was the amount of the casting totals as computed by the employee? The answer is $39,000. I'll bet a lot of you got that right, even though it was kind of an irrelevant fact, but it's money and it's an amount. We tend to remember that. Number 9, what were the monthly payments on the new car? Almost everyone gets this one correct, $50, because it was so low, it was unusual, and again, it's money, and we like to remember that. Number 10, who was the commissioner whom you could not trust? His name was Rollins. Spell it however you want. So out of that 10, how many did you get correct? 3? 4? More? Conclusions? We're lousy at remembering names like Joan and Steve and Wallen Company and Rollins. We remember numbers better, 3:30 a.m., 16% of our time, $39,000, $50 payments. And we remember unusual things like $50 payments on a classic car. And we remember things that are repeated like oranges, eggs, and milk. So those are some listening skills that we can pick up from this video. We also need to understand that when we're communicating, words that we say do mean something. So if you were to talk to Stevie Wonder, who's been blind all his life, and he asked you to define blue, could you do that? He's never seen blue. And you say, well, it's a color, and he doesn't know what color is. Very difficult. Or define the taste of salt to a man from Mars or somewhere who's never tasted salt. You'd say, well, it's not sour, it's not sweet, it's what? Salty. He hasn't tasted it. Difficult. Here's an example. What does I love you mean when a man says it to a woman on the first date? Does he truly love her? Or does he just want her? What about after 12 years of marriage? Does it mean something different? Maybe. Hopefully. Okay, here's my story. I call it the missionary rush story. So I took my wife with me to my 25th high school reunion. And I was standing around talking with other people that I'd gone to high school with, and we talked about how we met our spouse, how long we dated before we got married, and so forth. And when they turned to us and asked us, my wife said, and this is true, or maybe I said, we went on our first date on February the 22nd, February 16th. We got engaged on March 22nd, and we got married on June the 7th of the same year. And they said, wow, why so fast? That's really fast. And my wife said, well, he gave me the missionary rush. And they started snickering and giggling, and my wife couldn't figure out why. Well, it turned out that what they thought, what missionary rush is, they thought of the missionary position of sexual relations and thought I had got her pregnant, so we had to get married. Nothing could have been further from the truth. what she meant was that I courted her with the same zeal and level of spirituality that I did as a missionary trying to convert people to our church. And in fact, she would not even let me kiss her except on the cheek until we were engaged. So in our little subculture, the missionary rush meant something completely different than what my classmates thought. On the way home, I told my wife what they thought she had meant. She said, turn around and go back and tell them. I said, nah, too late. And besides, it'll make a good story to tell. So words do mean something. Another thing that affects our communication is the correct setting. So I was talking about my wife, and I proposed to her for marriage. It was out by a lake. You'd want a romantic spot like a lake, a beach, a fancy restaurant with candlelight and so forth. What about to propose to consult? I want to get a consulting job. Do I go to a romantic beach with the client? A fancy romantic restaurant? No. If I go to a restaurant, it's not going to be McDonald's either. It's going to be a business type restaurant. So the setting makes a difference too as to where you do this. You don't just say, I'm changing the oil, and say to your wife, hand me a wrench and will you marry me? Or we're bowling and in between lines, I got 2 pins knocked down. By the way, would you marry me? Not very good. The setting does make a difference. Okay, so let's talk about one-way versus two-way communication. So have you ever received a memo or an email or an edict? That's one-way communication. It's sender-oriented. There's no feedback allowed. The boss, the president of the company, calls a meeting and does all the talking, doesn't allow any questions. It's fast. It's efficient. It's quiet. But often it's not very accurate because we can't ask those follow-up questions. We're not exactly sure if we know what was meant by the memo. Two-way communication, on the other hand, has two parties. I've got a boy and a girl here. Feedback is allowed. I don't understand what you meant. What do you mean by that? Could you clarify? Do you mean this? It's slower because we're allowing feedback and questions. It's less efficient, therefore. Often it's noisier because people are allowed to ask questions, interrupt, and so forth. And the sender may be attacked. Well, that's a stupid way to explain it. Did you really mean this? But it's more accurate. More people will get the message through two-way communication. So that's what we strive for. So the boy says, how about a date? Because it's two-way communication. She says, no, you're ugly. Okay. Well, that's not the message you wanted, but that's the idea of two-way communication. Here's my favorite example. Remember Desert Storm when we attacked the Iraqis to drive them out of Kuwait the first time we went to war? They had these missiles they called Scud missiles. Well, let's assume that we have this howitzer over here on the left, and we want to take out the Scud missile on the other side of a big sand dune. We can't see it, but we know it's there. So we put Private Jones up here on the top of a hill. We give him a walkie-talkie, and we say, I'm going to shoot off a shell, and I want you to tell me how close I came and what corrections I need to make to take out that missile. He says, yes, sir. So he gets up on the hill, and we lob our first shell. And it goes, wow, we overshot the target. So you get the message over the walkie-talkie, sir, this is Private Jones on the hill. You overshot the target. Lower your azimuth by 15 degrees. So you make some adjustments, and you shoot your second shell. And it goes off right over his head, and he screams back at you some word, something about your mother in combat boots, and squares at you and says, you almost killed me. You're an idiot. I said 15 degrees, not 50. Well, that miscommunication, this feedback you get, is tough to take, but you need it. So that's the trouble with two-way communication. We don't like it, but we need it. So finally, we make the correct adjustment, and we take out the Scud missile. Two-way communication is important. Okay, we're going to stop there. When we start part 3 for Habit 5, we will begin by talking about the Pygmalion effect and see another great video.